I09 presents The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy. And here are your hosts, John Joseph Adams and David Barr Kirtley.
Hello, and welcome to episode 36 of Geek's Guide to the Galaxy.
Hi, I'm John Joseph Adams. I'm the editor of several anthologies, such as Wastelands and the Living Dead, and also Fantasy Magazine and Lightspeed Magazine. And Lightspeed Magazine was just nominated for a Hugo Award, and so was I.
And I'm David Barr Kirtley. I'm the author of many short stories, including The Second Rat, about a man who discovers that he can rewind time. The story originally appeared in the Canadian science fiction magazine On Spec, and also in MechMuse Audio Magazine. And today on the show, we'll be interviewing Mary Roach. She's the author of 4 popular science books, including Stiff, The Curious Lives of Human Cadavers, Spook, Science Tackles the Afterlife, and Bonk, The Curious Coupling of Science and Sex. And her most recent book is Packing for Mars, The Curious Science of Life in the Void, which deals with some of the less glamorous aspects of space travel.
All right, so let's get to our interview.
All right, so we're here with Mary Roach. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
So your new book is called Packing for Mars. What's it about?
Packing for Mars is all about all of the surreal physical and physiological challenges of trying to live in space as a human being, and human beings are just not in the slightest bit equipped to do that. So it's kind of an entertaining challenge. And it's also about all these bizarre simulations that happen on Earth. Kind of weird behind-the-scenes NASA shenanigans. And so when I took part in some of these, you can almost go to space without leaving Earth in a way. So that's what the book is about.
So all your previous books have one-word titles, Stiff, Spook, and Bonk. Why'd you decide to break the trend?
Well, we didn't decide to break the trend. We just failed to follow the trend. We couldn't come up with anything because I wanted something that suggested the human side of space. I didn't want something rockety. You know, I don't want orbit or zoom or space. We really spent an embarrassing amount of time trying to come up with something.
Did you ever consider the title Pooping in Space? Because, I mean, just listening to interviews with you, the subject of pooping in space seems to come up an awful lot.
And that's not my fault. I do not bring it up every other.
Well, we only have about 5 or 6 questions about it. Okay.
It's okay, because secretly it is a lot of fun to talk about.
So speaking of which, actually, I think most people think of spaceships as being really clean and sterile, but you make them sound pretty filthy. Could you talk a bit about that?
I spent a fair amount of time reading the Gemini 7 transcript, because this is the very first time anybody had been in space for 2 weeks, and we were leading up to the moon mission and back in the 60s. And this was a mission where one of the things they were looking at is just how revolting and gross and unhygienic does it get to be in this little capsule, sleeping in your spacesuit without a shower, crapping in a bag? Is it beyond the tolerance of a human being? And so I interviewed Jim Lovell, the Apollo 13 guy. I wasn't interested in Apollo 13. I was interested in Gemini 7. And I asked him about some of the yuck stuff and like dandruff. I brought up, because when you don't shower, all the cells that you exfoliate, they don't get washed down the drain. They just accumulate. You tend to get dandruff. And I asked him about that, because in zero gravity, the dandruff doesn't fall to the floor or to your shoulder. It just sort of floats. And I asked him if it was sort of like a snow globe in there. But elsewhere, I saw someone interview him, and he said it was like living in a latrine. But and Lovell said that they had some problem with the urine containment system. And so, he had a comment in the mission transcript somewhere that they were doing a urine dump, but he said, not very much, though. Most of it ended up in my underwear.
Actually, speaking of urine, there's a part in the book where you're talking about, a comment one of the astronauts makes about how amazing the view is, and it's sort of like unclear whether or not he's talking about the Earth or the sort of crystallized urine that was being,
Yeah, I read in at least 2 memoirs this description of when they eject the liquid urine, it sublimates, and if the sun is hitting it, it's this sort of beautiful. I haven't seen it, myself, but it sounded like this sort of, almost like fireworks or sort of this sparkly, beautiful thing. And they would remark on how beautiful this was.
So what sort of physical attributes do space agencies look for when selecting astronauts?
Some of the physical attributes are kind of entertaining. Like in Japan, I was talking to the flight surgeon about sorts of things that would disqualify you. And he said, if you snore a lot, that would disqualify you because it will wake everybody up. I also remember reading that in the Chinese Space Agency would disqualify someone with very bad breath, not because it suggests that you have some problem with tooth decay or gum disease, but because it would be unpleasant for the other astronauts.
And there was this whole thing sort of for similar reasons where they kind of looked at digestion, right?
I found this study. It was a conference, 1964 conference on nutrition in space and related waste problems. And one of these guys actually suggested that one of the things NASA should consider is what type of intestinal bacteria the person had, because if you, not because of the smell, mind you, but because if you produce methane, methane is explosive and hydrogen as well. I mean, most everybody produces some hydrogen, but one of the things they should look at is how much of your flatus is explosive. And there's some people who have more explosive flatus than others. They're actually suggesting that this is something NASA might want to consider when they, here's another great one from that same conference. I just think people must have been high at this conference. But there was this one guy who said, rather than launching all this food, you could launch obese astronauts. I calculated that for 50 pounds of weight, that would be 184,000 calories you wouldn't need to carry the food for. So you could just launch, give them vitamins and let them live off their fat.
Well, I mean, like, speaking of sort of odd characteristics that you might want for a spaceship crew like that, I mean, what do you think would be some of the advantages to sending a crew of aging deaf-mute eunuchs into space?
Aging, yes, certainly for a trip to Mars, because you're going to get a heavy dose of dangerous cosmic radiation. And by the time you get the cancer, if you're 60 when you left, maybe you get the cancer when you're 75 or 80, and you're heading toward the end of your life anyway. So that would be a good choice. And eunuchs, absolutely. Eunuch, the way to go, to avoid all the soap opera, avoid, the falling in love and the anger and the possible murder and jealousy. Definitely, self-castration is going to put you in a good position for a Mars mission. And deaf-mute. Well, yeah, deaf-mute. You mean just so that you don't have to listen to the tedious babblings of your other crew members?
Well, didn't you say that would make you immune from space sickness? Did I read that right?
Oh, yeah, you're right. That's right. Yes, if you have the inner ear is what determines whether or not you're going to get motion sickness. If you've got, there's certain people who have, deaf mutes frequently don't get motion sick because, I don't know exactly what the mechanism is, but they're frequently immune. So yes, that would be a good, That would make a good question to weed out, who really wants to be there. Would be like, that would cut the numbers down really fast. Yeah.
It's like, so we're going to chemically castrate you before you go into space. Is that cool with you?
Yeah, right.
Okay, so, what sort of effects does weightlessness have on the human body, and how long can people last under those conditions?
Weightlessness does a number on the human body. It almost affects just about you name an organ, something happens. If you're just floating instead of walking as a way to get around, your body starts to dismantle your skeleton and your muscles, figuring, you know what, I guess we don't need these anymore. Let's streamline things and use this material and use our energy more efficiently, so that you lose bone. You become like an old woman. You're losing on a Mars mission. They've said from 1/3 to 1/2 of a drop in bone density, which is pretty scary. Of course, when you come back down to Earth, gravity, you would start to regain that, but not necessarily in quite the same way. And there'd be some places that would remain compromised. You also, in zero gravity, you have less blood, because what happens, all the blood floats up to your upper half of your body, not all of it, but you have a lot less in the legs. The sensors in your body that tell your body, to figure out how much blood you have. Think that you have too much because it's all migrating up. So you start, you lose water weight, you lose weight. You've got you're immunocompromised a little bit because you've got just less blood. Your bladder doesn't work the way it's supposed to, or the way it's designed to in Earth gravity, because it's an organ that works via stretch receptors. So when the urine starts to accumulate on the floor of the bladder when you're standing up, eventually that pushes the sides out. Your stretch receptors are activated, tell your brain time to go pee. Well, that doesn't happen in zero gravity because now the liquid, the urine, is floating all around the organ. It's sort of clinging by surface tension to the whole thing. So by the time the stretch receptors are activated, you might have so much urine in the organ that the urethra is pressed shut. And so anyway, you could have a minor medical emergency involving an embarrassing call to the flight surgeon and getting out the catheter kit.
But there's also this sort of space beauty phenomenon, right?
The space beauty treatment, yes, that has to do with having more fluid in the upper half of the body. So your wrinkles are plumped out. Also, your organs migrate up under your rib cage more. So your waist is smaller. Your boobs are more pert and your hair is fuller. What else? I think those are the main components of the space beauty treatment. But the other thing to bear in mind is that the alternate name for all of this is the puffy face chicken leg syndrome. So it's debatable as to how attractive it actually makes you look.
And then how long could you last in zero gravity?
Well, that depends on if you were ever planning to come back to Earth gravity. If you just were going to continue on in zero gravity, you weren't going to need your muscles or your bones ever again. You'd be fine. You're basically you're not evolving, but you're adapting to that situation. The danger comes when you return to Earth, or say you were in a situation where the capsule splashdown didn't go right and you needed to get out quickly. Something was on fire. You're trying to jump down out of the capsule and run away, and you've lost a third of your bone mass. That could be a dangerous thing. The other thing, though, when you come back down from space, you're not going to be so much worried about your bone loss as the fact that when you've been up there for 6 months or more, you then have to completely readjust to what's going on with your vestibular system. So you're dizzy. It seems like everything's spinning around because the little bones in your inner ear have adapted to weightlessness. So now you come back down and you're sick and disoriented all over again. It's called Earth sickness. And you can't, you haven't had any weight. Your legs and arms and limbs haven't weighed anything for so long that you literally forget how to use them. That's what I was told by one of the ISS space station astronauts.
So since you wrote Packing for Mars and you also wrote a book called Bonk, which is about sex, I feel like we should ask you about sex in space. So what was it like doing the research for that aspect of the book?
Oh, it was very, very entertaining because I spent some time in Moscow and Star City where the cosmonauts train, and cosmonauts tend to be pretty down to earth guys. But that's really long, really, really long adjective for these guys. Okay, they tend to be pretty earthy. They tend to be straightforward. They're funny. You can ask them anything. So I asked this one guy, Alexander Levakin. I said, so, you were up on Mir, 2 guys for 6 months. You were a young, healthy man then, wasn't that? What do you do about libido? What do you do about sexual urges? Was that a problem? And he said that, Mary, people ask me this all the time. They say, how are you making sex in space? And I say, of course, by hand. He's just very straight. Yeah, of course, we jerk off. But he said, and I had read this somewhere and thought that it had to be made up, but he confirmed, he said the Institute of Biomedical Problems, which is the Physiological Research Institute for the Space Agency in Russia, they thought about sending up what he called it a mock-up, a rubber woman, an inflatable sex toys. And the reason they didn't do it is that Mission Control said, no, we're not going to work that into your schedule. We're just not going to do that.
So in the book, you talk about how astronauts might want to eat their clothes and then fly home in a ship covered in feces. That sounds like quite a party.
I don't think want would be the right word there. Someone proposed that you could make clothing out of edible fibers, and that the astronauts, when they were done wearing the clothes, presumably when they were dirty enough, that then they could actually eat them, which just sounded ghastly. Someone else suggested that components of the spacecraft that you don't need on the return could be, you could actually eat parts of your spaceship. They could be made of some kind of edible, I don't know, hydrolyzed protein that you would then just sort of tuck into on the way home. The business with feces, this is a radiation protection idea that you would, because hydrocarbons are apparently very good at absorbing radiation. You can't like line the thing with lead. It would make it too heavy. So you'd use water, food, feces. These would be add an element of protective layer. So you could kind of, presumably you'd have some sort of device that would, plastinate them so that you wouldn't be smearing shit all over the interior of the spacecraft. You'd be and there is at NASA Ames, there is a machine that makes these, it turns them into tiles, and you would sort of tile the capsule.
Okay. So, so I write science fiction, and I was thinking, say if I wanted to write a scene in which an astronaut aboard a space station goes berserk and whips out a knife and tries to murder his fellow astronauts, what sort of facts about zero gravity should I keep in mind when writing that scene?
You stab somebody in zero gravity, you're going to kill them pretty much the way you'd kill them on Earth. I don't think there's any reason why, if you cut an artery, you cut an artery. The blood, the heart's still going to be pumping, and it's going to be pumping the blood out just as it would in Earth gravity.
Would you have any trouble with like your body going backward as fast as your arm was going forward, and sort of, having trouble penetrating because you have no leverage to stuff like that?
Yeah, that's the other thing I was thinking, because when you're out on a spacewalk and you're trying to tighten a bolt, if you aren't in a foot restraint and you try to turn a nut, you will turn and not it, because it's stationary. So you have to have something to push against. So I was trying to think if that would be, if you stab somebody, there's going to be, it isn't going to be the same sensation because you're not anchored onto the ground in the same way. So yeah, you might want to practice first on a melon or something.
And how about, if you were to, make your first cut with the blood just then start coming out and just, obscuring your view and stuff? Well,
if you cut you cut an artery and it would, that on Earth would be spurting out fairly aggressively. It's going to, it's not going to drop. It's not going to do the same thing. It would just sort of start forming a sphere, a blobby looking thing. Like showers don't work in zero gravity. The water just comes out and starts making a growing blob.
Okay. And so how about like if instead of a knife, it was a machine gun?
You're risking losing pressurization of your spacecraft, particularly because some of these things are hopefully they're made of like Kevlar or something quite durable, but I wouldn't want to try to use any sort of armor penetrating bullets, because you're going to penetrate the spacecraft and then you've lost pressurization. Everybody dies. The kickback. It would be quite an interesting ride for the person holding the gun as well, because it would sort of fire you backwards. But that reminds me of I asked an astronaut about, there's a myth that if you fart while you're in zero gravity, it works like rocket propellant, to quote unquote propel you across the middeck. That was a rumor. And this one astronaut I interviewed said he didn't buy it, because he said, the human lungs hold more than the average fart, more air, and when you exhale, it doesn't blow you back. And so he didn't believe it, and I think he must have eaten a bunch of beans. He said he had a real voluminous and rapidly expelled purge. Those were his words. And he said, I failed to move noticeably. So you cannot, according to him and other people, there's a debate amongst people that I've talked to. But he said, no, he tried it. He was wearing pants, though, because it was a mixed gender flight mission, that is. And
I hope he would wear pants anyway. But...
Yeah, but he thought that the wearing of the pants might have interfered with the cleanness of the expulsion and sort of compromised his ability, his thrust. So
not a valid experiment.
Yeah, but he promised me he'd ask other people, but I never heard back.
Do you know if of any like fist fights and things like that breaking out on space missions?
I have heard that cosmonauts have. I mean, what I was told when I was in Star City is that fist fights are they had this term. It was a friendly fist fight. Like the fist fights are kind of how you settle things, and that it isn't a huge deal. That it isn't the same sort of major altercation that it is here in the United States. And so I have heard that there have been fist fights on Mir, but I don't have the details. I just have heard that is it was somebody at NASA Ames told me that that's sometimes how they've solved disputes on Mir.
Do you know what they would do? Like, if somebody was on this International Space Station and just like one person died and the rest of the crew was still there, like, what would they do?
Well, if they were in orbit, they could send up an orbiter like the shuttle, and they could remove the body and bring it down, and have the family could do whatever they're going to do in terms of a memorial service. When it becomes a little trickier is, say you're on a Mars mission. Mm-hmm. And you're on the way to Mars, or you just got there, or you've just left to come home. It's an 8-month trip. What are you going to do? And there is actually, I posted this. I mean, I did a guest post on Boing Boing, the website Boing Boing, about there's a device, and it is just there has not been a prototype built, but there was a paper that was done jointly with NASA and these folks that I met when I was doing STIF that have that freeze drying and composting method in Sweden. And they came up with something that would, basically you put the body in the airlock, freeze it solid, and then it would vibrate it into small pieces. And then it would be in this little pod, this powder. And then you would just basically pull it behind the spacecraft until you're re-entering Earth atmosphere. And then to keep it from pre-cremating, you would bring it back on board. And then, when you land, you would present it to the family. It would be in a sort of small, something that could be carried by 2 people. I forget. It was called Body Back. That's the name of the system.
Okay, so Dave and I are both work in science fiction publishing. So, what are some of your favorite science fiction books and movies?
Oh, I loved THX 1138. I want to see that again. I love that was Spielberg's first movie, wasn't it?
Lucas. Yeah.
Lucas. Yeah. I just recently saw Moon, with Sam Rockwell, which I liked a lot. I'm a fan of Ray Bradbury, although not so much the space stuff. I like some of the stuff like that weird one where the guy gets his skeleton pulled out through his mouth because this woman who has her hair falls over her face in this sort of sexy way for the whole story. Turns out it's hiding this hideous mouthpiece, which comes out. And The Veldt, I love that short story, Bradbury short story. The Red what's that, that trilogy?
The Kim Stanley Robinson.
Yes. Yeah. I read the red one was pretty impressive in terms of its accuracy. Just it seemed like a really sort of accurate scenario for the psychological as well as the technological stuff. That was pretty cool. 2001, obviously, I love. Yeah. So go ahead.
Was there anything, any sort of big misconceptions you had from watching movies about astronauts that, doing the research for this book, came as a big surprise to you?
I had no idea until I started this book that when you're heading to the moon or to Mars, you're essentially coasting. I sort of thought it was like a car where you'd have your foot on the gas the entire time. And I used to think, Jesus, that's a lot of gas. How do they do that? I didn't realize, the initial blast propels, you get escape velocity, and then you're just coasting because there's no air resistance, nothing to slow you down. So you just keep on coasting all the way. That just was amazing to me. And for some reason, maybe cartoons that show exhaust coming out of rockets, I had this misconception about how rockets worked. I mean that's really basic stuff. It shows you how completely ignorant I am at the start of every book.
When you were talking to like NASA employees and astronauts and whatnot, did any of them ever talk about science fiction?
I do remember seeing there is a list of all the books that are on the International Space Station, and there's a ton of science fiction. I should send you that list. I have it somewhere, but if you remind me. But there were a lot of science fiction books up there that people are reading. So clearly it's popular stuff for astronauts.
Well, that's what we like to hear.
So are there any other recent or upcoming projects that you're working on that you'd like to mention?
Oh, I am working on a new book, but I'm keeping it under my hat for now.
I mean, so like if someone is a big fan of your books and they want to sort of get into doing that sort of thing themselves, do you have any advice for, how they would get started in that?
Well, these days, one of the things that agents say is that if you have a following in either on a blog or Twitter or some other social media, that you have a built-in audience that's already sort of eager to hear what you have to say or read what you want to write, that's a huge advantage. So I counsel people to undertake something like that, either building a Twitter following or writing a blog. A lot of science writers have pretty, fairly popular blogs now, and that's a really good stepping stone for a book publishing career. I mean, I didn't do it that way because when I started out, there really wasn't any of that. But and it's not to say that you have to do that, but that definitely is something that agents and publishers are eager to see.
So, I mean, if people want to find you online, like how should they go about that?
Oh, they can find me on maryroach.net is my website, but also the Twitter. I'm on Twitter at Mary_Roach or _ So those are probably the two. There's a Facebook site too, but I'm not on there very much. So those are the two best ways to keep in touch.
And that was our interview. So thanks so much to Mary Roach for joining us on the show. Okay, and, since Mary's book is all about sort of the, some of the unpleasant things that might happen to you in outer space, I thought maybe for our discussion today we would talk about sort of creepy, awful things that happen to characters in stories in spaceships and on space stations. So, sort of the first thing along those lines that kind of comes to mind for me is Ridley Scott's Alien movie and its sequels. These movies all came out before John and I met. So I don't know if we've ever really talked about them before. So I was just kind of curious, John, what's kind of your take on those 4 Alien movies?
Well, if you're talking about 4, I'm not actually aware that there are 4. There's only 2. The first 2 are great. I mean, I actually prefer Aliens, the second one, the James Cameron one. I prefer that to the original, which is a pretty rare thing in movies that the sequel can surpass the original. But I mean, both the first 2 are great. Really terrific meldings of horror and science fiction in a way that I think probably hadn't really been done before, at least not in film. And and as I sort of alluded to in my initial comments, 3 and 4 are just abominations. I mean, I don't remember 3 very well. I mean, I remember thinking it was bad. But I mean, I saw it fairly young and, I haven't rewatched it since. Alien 4, I remember better because I was older when I saw it. And, I just, I remember how much I hated it. And, it's a shame because it had what you would think would be good talent associated with behind the scenes. I mean, Joss Whedon wrote the screenplay and, I don't remember the director's name, but the director was this French director who directed like City of Lost Children and Delicatessen and a lot of, highly regarded science fiction films. And I mean, on the surface, it kind of seems like a ridiculous pairing. I mean, in that this guy's he's an auteur and he's being hired to direct Alien 4, and it's like, I don't know if he really got it. I mean, maybe there was a language barrier or something, but that was pretty terrible.
But no, because I definitely watched Aliens. I mean, I've watched Aliens many, many times. And, the original Alien was sort of before my time. And I kind of went back and watched it later. Sort of one of the things that I remember most vividly about those movies is that my parents are scientists and science fiction fans, and they had a lot of friends who were scientists and science fiction fans. And we were talking to one of my parents' friends, and she was saying that both Alien and Aliens were good. She said the first one was good and it was scary, and the second one was good but it wasn't scary. And that just blew my mind as a kid because it was the scariest movie I'd ever seen. It was sort of like a milestone for me when I watched that movie for the first time without, covering my eyes or just being terrified, And I can kind of see what she meant now because the first movie is more of a horror movie and the second movie is more of an action movie. And I think that's what James Cameron, I think I saw a quote by him where that's what he kind of said, is he said he wanted Aliens to be less horror and more terror. And another thing I really remember about Aliens is that when I first saw it, there's this scene where they have these sort of automatic sentry gun things, and the aliens are trying to get in through this corridor, and the guns are shooting them, and the humans are all just kind of huddled around a computer, and they're watching this screen that says how many rounds are still left in the guns, and the number's just going down and down and down and down. And just when the guns are almost out of ammo, the aliens give up and go off to try to find a different way in. It's always just struck me as just a really great scene that you can be so terrified by just some people watching a number on a screen, Mm-hmm. But then later, when the movie came out on VHS, or, when I bought it on VHS, then I watched it, and that scene's not in there. They cut it out for the VHS. And at that time, when I was younger, I didn't really think of there being different versions of movies. There was just there's the movie, and you bought it and you watch it. And so it just really it was just a weird experience. I was like, wow, I remember there being this scene and it's not in the movie, Did I dream that or something? But then later on, they released, I don't know, fairly recently they released a DVD with lots of scenes inserted back in that had been cut for various earlier iterations. Did you see that where they stuck in all this extra footage?
I'm pretty sure I saw that edition. I'm not the sort of person that I would remember all these different details, whether they were in there or not. I mean, except in the case of Star Wars, where I've seen those movies so many times, every time George Lucas tinkered with something in the special editions and whatever, it was glaring in my face, annoying me to no end. But with Aliens, I've seen it a number of times, and it's one of my favorite movies, but I can't say that I know it well enough that I would have spotted those differences.
I mean, the most noticeable change was that they showed you the colony on LV-426 before the alien attack. In the original version, the Marines arrive on the colony and it's all destroyed, and that's the first time you're seeing anything. And in the re-released version, you see Newt's parents discovering the aliens, crashed ship and stuff. But yeah, no, I just think Aliens is so good. I think it's just really almost a perfect movie in terms of accomplishing what it sets out to do, in terms of being a horror, science fiction, action kind of movie. Mm-hmm. For horror writers, I think one of the hardest things has been contriving scenarios in which your characters are cut off, are isolated, or cut off from help, because with the internet and cell phones and everything, it's really hard to construct a scenario in which the characters, in which why don't the characters just call the police or, find some people to help them, because the world is so interconnected. And, a spaceship or a space station really does offer you that kind of setting where, okay, you really are by yourself here. You really are on your own here. But yeah, so Alien and Aliens are both great. And Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection are badly, badly flawed.
It's a real shame with Alien 3, because it's directed by David Fincher, who, at the time, I'm sure I didn't know who he was. I wasn't really paying attention to the directors at that age, but, he's gone on to direct some really great stuff, and including Fight Club, which is one of my favorite movies ever. So it's really disappointing to look back and see that, oh my God, he directed an Alien movie, but it's terrible.
No, but apparently David Fincher is really unhappy, with how that turned out, that there was all sorts of, it sounds like it was a complete mess. That there was no script, and the studio was really interfering a lot, and the script went through all sorts of rewrites. I don't know if that William Gibson wrote one of the drafts for Alien 3.
Oh, did he? No, I didn't know that.
Yeah, they were planning to do sort of Alien 3 and Alien 4 kind of as a big two-part story, and so they had Gibson write the first part of that, but then that ended up not being used at all.
Yeah, because why would you want any input from an actual science fiction writer? I mean, you hire him to do it, and it's oh well, this is crap. Let's get one of these Hollywood guys to do it, because they really know science fiction.
I actually think, I've heard a lot of people say that Alien 3, as a sequel to Aliens, is a travesty. But if you just evaluate it if you sort of pretend it has no association with the earlier movies and just evaluate it on its own merits, that it's a sort of okay horror science fiction movie. Mm-hmm. That just the reason people hate it so much is because they kill off Hicks and they kill off Newt. I actually saw, George R. R. Martin was recently polled on his top 10 science fiction movies, and he listed Aliens, I think, as one, and said, Aliens ends with Newt asking Ripley, can we dream in the stasis pods on the trip back to Earth? And Sigourney Weaver says yes, and George R. R. Martin says it would be nice if in Alien 5, that they wake up and everything that happened in Alien 3 and Alien Resurrection was just a dream. I mean, one thing that I thought was kind of interesting is that on Wikipedia I came across this quote, and it says, Ridley Scott had wanted, this is at the end of the original Alien movie, that Ridley Scott had wanted the alien to bite off Ripley's head and then make the final log entry in her voice, but the producers vetoed this idea as they believed that the alien had to die at the end of the film. So that's kind of funny. If he had gotten his way, that would have been the end of her right there. And so then, Alien Resurrection, kind of what's your...
I mean, one instance in particular really sticks in my mind is there's a scene toward the end of the movie where there's some sort of abomination alien going on there. I don't even remember what the situation was. Was it part human or something? I don't know what it was.
Yeah, no, the ending is really, really weird.
Well, yeah, and it's completely disgusting. I mean, it's because the alien gets sucked out through a tiny hole in the hull or something. Yeah. And it's well, that's kind of cool, but it was so gross and just sort of felt so gratuitous that it was why is this in this movie? And it's just a horrible thing to watch.
No, but apparently, Joss Whedon wrote 4 endings for the movie or something, and they didn't use any of them. And the ending, it's almost cool in a way, but it doesn't fit the movie at all. It belongs in a Terry Gilliam movie or something. It's so out there, but it's it turns out at the end that there's this alien and its genes have kind of gotten mixed with Sigourney Weaver's, and so now it has a womb and it doesn't have to have face huggers and chest bursters and stuff. It can just give live birth to aliens spawn, and so it births this half alien, half human hybrid that kind of recognizes Sigourney Weaver as its mother, and then she kills it by throwing acid blood on the hull and then having its innards sucked out into space. Alien Resurrection is a movie. I kind of feel about it almost like I do about Predator 2, where the execution is just really, really horrible. But there are a lot of cool ideas in it. This the stuff I don't know. There's cool scenes where they have the aliens sort of trapped in this observation cage kind of thing, and the aliens attack one of them and spill so much blood that it eats a hole through the floor, and they all escape. I thought that was pretty cool. And there's a part where the soldiers are all trying to escape in an escape pod, and they're all kind of strapped into harnesses, and then an alien gets into the escape pod with them, and they're all just screaming, and they're all just trapped there. So stuff like that. I mean, there's cool bits in it. It's kind of interesting. I came across this Joss Whedon quote, and I guess he's sort of saying what I was sort of thinking. He says, "It was mostly a matter of doing everything wrong. They said the lines mostly, but they said them all wrong, and they cast it wrong, and they designed it wrong, and they scored it wrong, and they did everything wrong that they could possibly do." And there's actually a fascinating lesson in filmmaking, because everything that they did reflects back to the script or looks like something from the script, and people assume that if I hated it, then they'd change the script. But it wasn't so much that they changed the script, it's just that they executed it in such a ghastly fashion as to render it almost unwatchable.
Wow.
But all right, so I don't know. I have a bunch of movies and a bunch of stories I wanted to mention, but I guess you have some stuff too. Do you want to maybe throw out? Why don't we stick to movies and then get into fiction afterward?
Okay. Well, there's a movie that comes to mind. I don't really recommend it. I didn't enjoy it per se, although there are cool things about it. But there's Sunshine by Danny Boyle. Did you see that?
I only saw the beginning of it. I rented it from iTunes, and it's one of those 24-hour rental things. And I watched the first part, and then I got busy, and then it had expired, and I didn't like it enough to rent it again or anything. Yeah, well, I mean, I don't know if you really missed anything. I mean, it's like there are people who really enjoyed that movie, but I'm not one of them. But there's a spaceship that's being sent to the sun to do something. I don't remember what the parameters of their mission are, but it has something to do with the fate of the world, and if they don't complete their mission, the world is going to be destroyed or something, and so that's cool, and I mean it's sort of set up in a good way. So it's there's really high stakes here, and a spaceship mission to the sun. That sounds cool, right? And so it progresses along that for a while there, and then at some point something happens on the ship, and people start going crazy or something, and so it sort of devolves into this
slasher movie, and like I don't know, it felt like it got completely derailed to me, but I mean it's definitely a science fiction horror movie, so you know I mean if people just want to see every science fiction horror movie out there, certainly add that one to the list. But yeah, if your iTunes rental expires, don't bother renting it again.
Well, no, and as you're sort of saying, I was actually having trouble coming up with sort of horror movies set on space stations and things that I can recommend unreservedly. You know, all my things, they're kind of like, well, if you're interested in the subject matter, you might check this one out. But
yeah,
you know,
yeah, I mean, you know, another one that comes to mind is Event Horizon.
Yeah.
I figured you were probably going to mention that as well. But I mean, again, that's another one where it was like, you know, God, it seems like it should be great, right? But I mean, it's not. And I haven't seen that one in a long time, so I don't really remember it that well. But I remember being really vastly disappointed in it. But I mean, it's explicitly trying to be, you know, SF and horror, like a blending of SF and horror. And yeah, I don't remember. I mean, does it actually deal with black holes as the name implies, or what's the deal with that?
Well, you know, yeah, like you, I saw this when I was in high school, I think. But the way I remember it is that there's this ship, and they're kind of jumping through hyperspace or something, and hyperspace somehow involves sort of a detour through hell, and demonic forces start taking over the ship or something. I sort of remember it being kind of a fairly good sort of haunted house in space movie for the first.
Oh yeah, right. That's exactly what it's supposed to be, is a haunted house in space. That's like the premise.
But for the first half, and then the second half, I remember just being really, really cheesy with like the hell stuff. And I just remember, I think it's Sam Neill with like eyeballs in his hands and just like people on hooks and stuff. I remember it getting really, just really corny in the second half.
Yeah, and I mean, wasn't there like a lost ship or something? Like wasn't there like a ship that went through hyperspace and was like lost for many years, and then they discovered it, and that's where all the bad stuff happened?
Yeah. No, that sounds right. Yeah.
Wow, I can't believe I remember.
Sort of like a Flying Dutchman sort of thing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of a not a wildly enthusiastic endorsement. Another one sort of along those lines is Pandorum. Did you see that one?
I didn't see it, no.
I actually...
it looked pretty bad, so I kind of avoided it.
Yeah, I think it's got like a 20 or 40% approval rating on Rotten Tomatoes or something like that. I thought it was enjoyable. I mean, if you go in with low expectations, it's sort of... It's got a couple cool things. It's sort of... I mean, it's basically The Descent in outer space. I mean... and actually, the Descent is really good. People should check that one out, although it's not on a spaceship or anything. But if you like The Descent and you want to watch the Descent in outer space, you could check out Pandorum. You know, the premise basically is that it's a sort of a colony ship, and a guy wakes up from cryostasis and finds that the ship is, has some disaster has befallen it, and weird mutant cannibals are running around, and he has to survive. You know, a lot of these movies, the ships are absolutely gigantic. And it's sort of like, as Mario was kind of getting at in the interview, you know, most real ships that we build, they tend to be really small, and there's not a single square foot of wasted space anywhere on the ship and stuff like that. And then in a lot of these, you know, science fiction movies, the ships are just, you know, like 10 miles long, and you know, there's just these gigantic rooms, and it just sort of makes you wonder, what the spaceship designers were thinking, you know.
Yeah.
Like, if there's one thing this ship needs, is some gigantic empty tunnels for 5 miles, you know.
Yeah.
Okay, and then just the last two movies I want to mention, you know, just as I was like trying to come up with horror set in space that I came across, that I have not seen these, but one is Jason X. I guess they this is the Friday the 13th franchise, and I don't know, at some point they weren't sure what they were going to do with it, and they just figured that they would make one set in the future so that it wouldn't confuse the continuity. I've heard it's terrible, but if anyone tells me that they liked it, I might watch it. And then there are these animated films connected with the Dead Space video games, and if somebody tells me that those are good, I might check those out.
Yeah, I've not seen either of those. I also have heard Jason X is pretty terrible, but I never really ever considered seriously considered seeing it.
But yeah, so obviously we're in need of some. If there are any good sort of horror in outer space movies, let us know, because it seems kind of slim pickings. But anyway, so let's move along to to some fiction. Let's see, John, you have some ones you wanted to mention, right?
I mean, the big one to me I want to mention is the Cold Equations by Tom Godwin. I mean, it's not typically like considered a horror story, but I mean, it's really emotionally, it feels like horror in a way because of what happens in the story. And I don't want anybody to tell you what it is because it's a great story and you shouldn't let it be ruined for you. And actually, I'm actually going to be reprinting it in Lightspeed in July. Actually, the reason I'm reprinting it is because I bought a new story from a new author named Jake Kerr, and his story is called The Old Equations. In that story, also it's about a guy in a spaceship, and some emotionally horrific things end up happening. Not to give too much away, but there's actually another story almost along the same lines that I published in Lightspeed. In October, there's a story called "A Taste of Starlight" by John R. Holtz. Yeah. I mean, talk about Dave's read it too, so he knows what I'm talking about. But talk about horror in space. I mean, that's a true horror story. And actually, that was a story I bought. Just it came in on spec, and I bought it, and because it was so horrific, I kind of thought, well, it might actually work better if I build a whole horror issue around this. So I did a whole issue in Lightspeed that was SF horror hybrids. Basically, that's a story where there's a guy on a cryo ship, and he wakes up and he finds all the crew are dead, and he's been woken up early. But there's not enough food on board for him to get to the destination. And unfortunately, he's like the main scientist behind this project that will help people at this colony that the ship's traveling to. So if he dies, all of them are going to die. So he's sort of put in this like terrible situation, and it's about what he has to do to figure out a way to survive. And it's a great story. It's really horrific. It's very, very horrific. I mean, I would strongly caution anyone who has a weak stomach from reading it without some trepidation. But you can actually also listen to the podcast of it as well. We have a podcast narration of it.
Okay, so the first story that kind of came to mind for me was this Arthur C. Clarke story I read when I was a kid called The Haunted Spacesuit. And it's just about this astronaut, and he just sort of, it's a very short story, but he just sort of starts freaking out when he starts imagining that his spacesuit, that somebody had died using the same spacesuit, and now it's haunted, and he's sort of trapped in very close confinement with the spirit of this dead astronaut. And so then that just kind of made me think of this really cool story by George R. Martin called Night Flyer, which is this really long novella. I guess it's almost novel length. So in that one, there's these people sort of book passage on this spaceship, and the captain, they never see him. He stays inside kind of this armored room, sort of a safe room aboard the ship, and he says that he can't come out to greet them because his immune system has been compromised or something, and he's afraid he'll get sick if he comes out. And so they accept that at first, but as the story progresses, they become more and more suspicious, and they start wondering if maybe the captain is dead and the ship is just piloting itself and stuff. But what it turns out, though, this is still fairly early in the story, is that the captain is that the ship is haunted, and the captain has locked himself in this room, and he won't come out because he's afraid of the ship, but he needs to keep flying it around because it's his only source of income. And everything's basically fine as long as the artificial gravity is on. But once the artificial gravity gets knocked out, the ship is kind of able to move objects around through zero-G and use them to attack the crew, or attack the passengers.
And so that actually reminds me of a haunted space station story. There's a Robert J. Sawyer story called Above It All, which you can actually read on his website, which is sfwriter.com, and he has that and a couple other stories on there. But This is one of the first stories I remember reading online, actually, because Robert Sawyer is a writer who I discovered fairly early on when I was really delving into science fiction seriously, and so and the internet was still sort of a fledgling thing at the time, or at least I was only getting into it at the time, and Rob Sawyer was one of the first SF authors to really have a major internet presence. Thus, he was able to secure sfwriter.com. But anyway, so the story Above It All, it takes place on the space station, on the Russian space station Mir, which launched in like 1986 and deorbited in 2001. Basically, there's an astronaut or a cosmonaut on Mir who kills himself, and I guess he was like the only person there. And so there's an American space shuttle mission going up into space, and so this happens when they're in space. And so Houston radios into the astronauts, and they say, "Hey, we have a little job for you. We need you to go pick up a body." And so he gets onto the space station, and it's like really creepy. It's like, there's droplets of dried blood floating around all over the place because it's like, zero gravity. But I mean, it's pretty cool and creepy, and it has some cool stuff about like, actual space mechanics. Like it feels pretty authentic.
And then just another scene. This is something I read when I was a teenager. But there's a book called The Mote in God's Eye by Larry Niven and Jerry Pournelle. The part that's really creepy that I really remember really vividly is that there are these aliens called Modis, and they're extremely intelligent, and they reproduce extremely quickly. And there's a part where they've kind of gotten onto one of these warships and are sort of running amok and are just all over the ship and chewing through the wires and stuff. It's kind of like in Star Trek, the episode with the Tribbles. They're just everywhere, and so the human crew realizes that they're going to have to abandon ship, and so they get another warship to approach, and then they're all just sort of walking out, and they're gonna, I think maybe there's like a bridge or something between the two ships that they're all gonna pass through, and so they're trying to be really, really careful that no Modis make it across from one ship to the other, and so they're checking everyone, all the crew, they're all in spacesuits, and they're all going from one ship to the other, and then just at one part, one of the guys realizes that one of these spacesuits there's not a human being inside it. It's just all full of these little Modis, and they're all kind of like working in concert to make the spacesuit walk. And so he kind of looks into the face masks and just sees all these little, sort of furry monster aliens in it, and panics and starts shooting at it. And the helmet breaks open, and all these Modis just start flying off into space and stuff. Yeah, so then just the last thing I was going to mention is this Star Wars novel called Death Troopers by Joe Schreiber. I haven't read it, but it sounds really cool. The premise, as I understand it, is basically a zombie plague breaks out on a Imperial Star Destroyer. It's gotten sort of mixed reviews. I haven't been sure whether I should read it or not. If anyone's read it, let me know if you think it's good, because it's a premise that certainly I think if done right would really, really be interesting. Oh, I guess there's one more thing I wanted to mention is there was this story by Kiz Johnson called Spar. This is a really, really cool, really weird story. Actually, earlier when I was talking about how in horror movies they always make the spaceships just these gigantic, things full of empty dark tunnels. Spar kind of takes the opposite tack, where it's this woman and she's aboard this very enclosed little space capsule thing, but she's in there with this kind of protoplasmic alien that's just that's just sort of engulfing her and sort of molesting her, and she's just trying to keep it at bay, and this just goes on and on and on, and it's just very, very vividly described, and just very sort of visceral, and it's a very one-of-a-kind kind of science fiction horror story.
Yeah, it appeared in Clark's World, so it's that's online, so you can go read that. You can just pop over there and read that. Actually, I think it was nominated for I think the Nebula and Hugo. It may have actually won both too. I'm not sure, but it was definitely and reprinted in a lot of years' best anthology. So it's pretty universally agreed that it's a terrific story. So definitely worth checking out. Okay, so I think we're gonna wrap things up there. Those are, some sort of horror stories on spaceships and space stations that came to mind. If you have anything you think we should check out or, want to recommend to other people, post a comment at io9.com. You can find that by going to our website at geeksguideshow.com and clicking on the, find the blog post for Mary Roach and click on that and it'll take you to io9. And while you're at our website at geeksguideshow.com, it would really help us out a lot if you would click on the ads for our sponsor, audible.com, and that'll take you to a page where you could sign up for it. You can sign up for a free trial membership and get a free audiobook. And, a free audiobook you might want to check out is one of our guest, Mary Roach's books. All four of her books are up there, Packing for Mars, which we talked about today, as well as Bonk and Spook and Stiff. So, check that out. And another way you can help support the show is if you want to help spread the word. So if you want to go to iTunes and you find find the Geek's Guide to the Galaxy podcast, or if you go to our website at geeksguideshow.com, you'll find a link to the iTunes store there. If you go to our iTunes page and you leave a comment or you leave a rating, that would really help. And of course, if you leave plentiful comments at IO9, that lets them know that you love us. And, any other way you can help spread the word is also appreciated. If you tell your friends about us or post about us on Twitter and whatnot, that's another way you can help support the show.
All right, so that's our show. So thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll see you next time.
The Geek's Guide to the Galaxy is a production of IO9. For this episode's show notes, to subscribe to this podcast, or for more information about the show, visit geeksguideshow.com. To learn more about your hosts, visit johnjosephadams.com or davidbarkirtley.com. Music and voiceover produced by Slipgate 9 Entertainment. If you enjoyed this program, tell your friends. If you didn't enjoy it, tell no one. Thank you for listening.